I've been around a long time. Had my 75th birthday this year. And back when I was really about 32, 32 or 33, I ran into this phenomena. And back then I have a PhD in marital and family therapy. So I was one of these obnoxious family therapists that thought we'd found the Holy Grail and that people who mucked around in the inner world were wasting their time because we could change all that by just reorganizing these external families, and decided to prove that. I was at a place called the Institute for Juvenile Research, which was part of this University of Illinois at Chicago psychiatry department. And so with a colleague, did an outcome study with bulimia, which was kind of fresh uh, diagnosis at the time, and uh, found that didn't work, that we could reorganize the families just right, and still a bunch of my kids kept going, kept binging and purging to my out of my much to my frustration. And out of that frustration, I began asking why, and they started talking what to me at the time was a strange language of parts. And they would talk about how when something bad happened in their life, it would trigger this critic who would call them all kinds of mean names. And then that would go right to the heart of another part of them that felt empty and worthless and lonely. And that feeling was so dreadful that the binge would come in to rescue them from that. But the act of the binge would bring back the critic who's calling them a pig on top of the other names now. And that would go right to that heart of that empty, worthless feeling. And so the binge would have to come back, and they would be caught up in that vicious cycle for days. And at first I got nervous because I thought maybe these kids are sicker than I thought. Maybe they have multiple, what was called at the time, multiple personality disorder, now called DID. Until I started listening inside myself, and oh my God, I've got a big critic, and I've got part that can binge not on food necessarily, but and then I calmed down about them and got intrigued. And I had a big advantage in that family therapy was polarized with psychoanalysis and in-depth psychology. So I hadn't studied any of that. And so I was forced to actually listen to what my clients were teaching me or were saying about their parts. And then I also had what's called systems thinking from family therapy. So I wasn't interested in each part separately, but how do they work as a system? So those were two big advantages that I brought to the phenomena. And uh, initially, I made the mistake that most of the field still makes, which is to try and get my client to stand up for herself to the critic or to try and control the binge. And I was encouraging all that. And in those days, I'd heard about Gestalt empty chair technique. And so I was having my client sit in one chair and talk to a part in another chair across from her, and then shift chairs and be the part. And then, because I was hearing about 5 and 6 parts, I'd have a bunch of chairs in my room and my clients hopping all over. And then one client said, I could just sit here and do it. So we tried that. And ever since, most people just sit there and do it. But I was, trying to change these interactions. Uh, and so I'm going to skip a story of how I stumbled onto this awareness. But at some point, I realized the futility in trying to either control or fight with these parts because it was making it worse, and got curious about why they did what they did rather than trying to push them around. And was amazed at how, as I could get curious or I could get my client curious and just ask why they did what they did, these parts would talk about how they were trying to protect my client, either trying to protect very vulnerable parts, other parts of her that were very vulnerable, or trying to protect her from having some scary parts take over, or or just trying to protect her from the outside world, but protecting her vulnerability in that way. And that blew my mind because they were very extreme, some of these parts, and doing a lot of damage, but seemed like they didn't have that intention. Their intention was always positive and protective. And so as I tried that with more and more clients and found over and over that was the case, I got excited, and maybe the field and the culture has really made a mistake about who these things are, and so that's true actually, that these parts, even the parts that have done heinous things, aren't what they seem to be, and that it is a mistake to try and get rid of them or try to control them, and that they actually do respond very well to pure curiosity. So taking a step back, 41 years later, we can safely say that it's the nature of the mind to be multiple, and that people with that diagnosis of DID are no different from anybody in this workshop, except that their system got blown apart more by the horrific trauma they suffered every day. So there are these amnesic barriers between their parts, but what are called alters in DID are just what I'm calling parts. It's no different, really. And the sort of radical approach, the radical position I've taken, and it's been a tough sell, both in the culture and in psychotherapy, is that it's the nature of the mind to be multiple, that it isn't the product of trauma. And that was the mistake that the DID world made, was to say nature of the mind is to be unitary, and that these parts are pathological because they're sort of shards of the broken vase, or they're fragments of the whole self, and the goal is to put them all back together into one. And I was hearing from these parts that that wasn't true, that they actually had their own existence, and they didn't want to be blended all back together, and that they liked being separate, and that they all had qualities and resources to give to my client to help them. So that's the basic assumption. One basic assumption is that we're all multiple personalities, and that's a good thing. And all these parts have valuable resources and qualities to help us in our life, and we're born with them, either manifest or in potential. But trauma, or it's called attachment injuries, or humiliations, or bullying at school, or all the things that happen to us as kids, force them out of their naturally valuable states into roles that can be destructive, and are roles that most of them don't like and hate in many cases, but feel like are necessary to protect you. So they're like kids in a family, because you work with a family and you'll notice there are these roles that kids get forced into, the scapegoat and the I forget all the names of them, but you'd think I know with my PhD in family therapy. But they aren't the essence of the kid. It's the role that the dynamics of the family force them into. And it's the same with this inner system. These are good parts forced into sometimes destructive roles, create symptoms or create mayhem. And yeah, that's not who they are. And so as I got hip to that, it really shifted how I related to them, and has ever since. And the other thing that happens to them is that they take in what we call burdens, that are the definition of which is an extreme belief or emotion that came into your system during the trauma, during the event or the series of events that you experienced usually as a child, but not always, and attach to these parts, these extreme beliefs and emotions, and then drive them like almost like a virus. So parts, good parts, valuable parts, get traumatized. They take in these extreme beliefs and emotions, and they get frozen in time. so that they don't live knowing that you're as old as you are and that you're not in any danger, not in the same kind of danger right now that you were back when they got stuck and when they started taking on the roles. So, such that if I, if I were to have, if I was working with one of you and I had you ask your part how old it thought you were, most of the time you'll get a single digit. And that's where it's stuck in time. That's where it got forced into the role it's in, usually. And so that's parts. And again, with my systems background and being a family therapist, I wanted to create a map of what I was learning. And so what I learned early on was that a lot of these parts, who other systems would call inner children, maybe, are quite young and sensitive. And before they're hurt, we love them because they give us lots of playfulness and creativity and open naivete and desire to connect. And before they're hurt, they're our most precious parts in many cases. But because they're so sensitive, they're the ones that are hurt the most by the betrayals and abandonments and all the rejections and all the crazy things that happen in our families and out of our families. And so now they carry the burden of worthlessness, maybe from being shamed, or the burden of emotional pain, or the burden of, excuse me, terror from some trauma. And once they carry those burdens and they're frozen in those scenes, they have the power to overwhelm us with those feelings and bring us back into those scenes we never wanted to go back to again. And so we have a kind of natural impulse to get away from them and to lock them away in an inner basement or abyss, and thinking we're just moving on from the trauma and the memories and the emotions, not realizing that in doing what our culture tells us to do, which is to just move on and don't look back and just keep going, we're locking away our most precious qualities simply because they got hurt or terrified or etc. And so these we call exiles. So most all of us have a bunch of exiles. It's really hard to grow up in this culture or in the kind of families that are influenced by our culture without having a bunch of exiles. And when you have a bunch of exiles, you feel more delicate and the world seems more dangerous because so many things could trigger them. And when they get triggered, it's like these raw flames of emotion come bursting out and overwhelming you and pull you back into those scenes and makes it hard to function, and you just don't want to feel that again. And some people don't get out of bed for a week when that happens. And so then a bunch of other parts are forced out of their naturally valuable states to become protectors. And some of them try to protect by managing your life so that nothing happens again like what happened before. And so some of them are trying to only let people get a certain closeness to you and keep a certain distance all the time. And then others are trying to make you look perfect so no one rejects you. And others are make you achieve at a high level so that you get accolades to counter the worthlessness. And others are trying to have you take care of everybody else so that they depend on you and don't leave you, but they don't let you take care of yourself, and so on and so on. There's a whole bunch of what we call manager protectors, common roles, and they're what other systems call the defenses, and many of them become these inner critics because they don't know what else to do but to yell at you to try and motivate you to look better or to work harder, or especially with trauma clients, there'll be a critic that's determined to keep you small so you don't shine and then you don't get hurt. And So those are some of the common sources of these inner critics. And they're, again, all these protectors are just trying to keep you safe. And so these we call managers. And again, their goal is to control you, control the world, and often to please everybody so you don't get hurt again. And there are those kinds of parts too that are just trying to please everybody. Doesn't work sometimes. The world has a way of breaking through those defenses, triggering your exiles. And as I said, that's a big emergency because these raw flames of emotion are bursting out and could take you out. And so there's another set of parts of protectors who stand by waiting for that alarm to go off and immediately go into action to get you higher than the flames or douse them with some substance or distract you until they burn themselves out. And so we call these firefighters. There's fighting those flames. And in contrast to the managers who are into control and all of that, firefighters take you out of control, piss off everybody, except for some of them, and don't care about the collateral damage to your body, to your relationships. They just got to do this job of getting you away from those emotions right now. So that's the map. It's pretty simple, really. Again, exiles, and there are exiles that aren't all just young and vulnerable. There are also parts that, if you grew up in a family that, for example, didn't like or hated anger, then you're going to have to exile the part of you that wants to stand up, wants to protect you and stand up for you. So there are exiled protectors as well, which we call protectors in exile, in contrast to exiles, which are these young, vulnerable ones. So that's the map. And it's held up well over these 40 some years. And but the big deal about IFS, in addition to all that, is that in addition to these parts, there is this essence that is in everybody and that can be accessed pretty quickly. So I'll tell you how I stumbled onto that. Being a family therapist, I was interested in having these parts get along better. And once I got hip to the fact that they deserved to be listened to rather than fought with, I would set that up and I would have maybe my client trying to listen to her critic, and she is, and it's going pretty well for a while. And then suddenly she's furious with the critic. And it reminded me of family sessions where I'm working with uh, I'm working with two family members, having them face each other who are polarized, and trying to get them to listen to each other. And suddenly a third member jumps in and is siding with one against the other, and everything goes south. And I thought maybe the same thing's happening in this inner system. Maybe as I'm trying to get my client to listen to the critic, a part who hates the critic has jumped in, is doing the talking. So I began asking clients, could you find that one who's angry at the critic, and could you get it to just step out or just relax back or just chill for a while and let us continue this conversation that was going well for a while? And to my amazement, clients could do that. And when they did, it seemed to release this other person entirely, who not only was curious toward the critic, but also had confidence relative to it, was calm relative to it, and also was even had compassion for it. And in that state, the critic would really drop its guard and would reveal its secret history of how it got forced into the role, and we could do a lot to help it. And when I tried the same process with other clients, sometimes it was the parts that were afraid of the one that we had to get to step back. But as I got clients to separate from these other polarized parts, it was like the same person would pop out with those same C word qualities of calm, confidence, clarity. Well, those are some new C words, curiosity, compassion, and also would have courage to work with scary parts, or would have want to connect, just this natural impulse to connect inside, and also be very creative in how they would relate to the part. So I just mentioned what we call the 8 C's of self, qualities of self, what I call self. And I call it self because when I got people in that state, by getting these parts to open space, I was started to say, what part of you is that? That's great. Let's keep that around. And people would say some version of, that's not a part like these others. That's me. That's myself. So I came to call that the self with a capital S because to distinguish it from the common use of the word self. And it turns out, again, 40 years later, thousands of people working with this model, both as therapists and clients, we can safely say that that self is in everybody, can't be damaged, knows how to heal, and is just beneath the surface of these parts such that when they open space, uh, it pops out. And that's quite amazing because as I was observing this in different clients, it flew in the face of what I'd been taught in graduate school, which many of you have been, which is attachment theory that says, I love attachment theory, many aspects of it, but they got one thing wrong, and that is the assumption that to have any of those C words at your essence, you had to have had a certain kind of good parenting at a critical point in your childhood. And if you didn't get that, you had to get it from a therapist or you had to get it from a spouse. It's something that came from a relationship. It wasn't inherent in you. And I was finding it, that same self, in clients who'd had horrible, horrible childhoods, tortured on a daily basis. There was no way you could account for them having that, the same self that we found in people that were a lot healthier, but through attachment theory. And so I had to actually look around, and some students actually steered me towards spiritual traditions. And it turns out most every spiritual tradition knows about it, and almost no other psychotherapies do. So the self is the big deal. Not only that it's there, and there are, like Jung had a term, self, and others did too. But for many of them, it was a kind of witness state to try and get to, like to meditate, to get to, rather than an active leader. But what I was finding was when people accessed that place, they really took over the session and they would start to interact spontaneously with these parts in ways that was quite healing. So they became what you might call inner good parents or inner good attachment figures or inner leaders in accepting all of their parts and going to them and helping them. So it turns out that that's who we really are, and that is something that can be fairly quickly accessed. You don't have to meditate 20 years to get to it. So anyway, that's a big deal, and that's the model. It's pretty simple. Again, protectors, exiles, two kinds of protectors, managers, firefighters, all until you get them to separate, often blended with self. So self is kind of obscured. And many of them, like in family therapy, we would call them parentified children. They're young, but they think they have to run your life because they did when they were young. They had to take over and they don't know about self. And so it's kind of a shock when you say, no, I'm not 5 years old. I'm actually, in my case, 75. It's shocking to me to just say that, period. But yeah, they're stunned to know that you've grown up and that you have more resources now. So so that's the model, and then I'll describe how it can work. So one of the things I learned the hard way was because in the early days, clients would talk about this sadness in their gut or this fear somewhere else, and I would think, okay, that sounds like a key part to help. And so I would try to get them to it really quickly. And they would do it in a session, and they'd be very vulnerable and crying a lot. And I thought, oh, great, finally getting to where we need to go. And then after the session, I would notice they'd have these sometimes pretty scary, what we call backlash reactions. And I had clients walk out of my office and get into a car accident, for example, or spike a big fever, or just have this horrible shame attack afterwards, and then getting curious about that, I learned what I was doing wrong. I was bypassing the protectors who'd spent decades trying to contain these exiles. And I was just kind of barging in and opening the door to all that. And they were punishing my client for having allowed that. And so I learned the hard way to be more respectful of these systems and to work with protectors first. So when someone comes in and they've got some kind of symptom and it sounds like it might be related to an exile, I'll say, we'll get to that. But before we do, I want to work with the parts that don't want us anywhere near that. And let me speak to those parts first. And in general, there are lots of symptoms that are caused by the protectors or problems. And so when I'm pretty sure it's a protector, I'll just go ahead and start there. And the process is also not terribly complicated. So I would have you focus on whatever the manifestation of the part is. Well, even before that, I would say, tell me about your problem. And I learned, like you did as a therapist, to feed back what I was hearing, but to add the phrase, oh, so one part of you says this to you and another part makes you feel this, and then there's this other part. So you just kind of bring in the parts language, which people say, yeah, that's right. They don't say, what are you talking about, parts? Because everybody already uses that word. So like, part of me is happy to be here and part of me so I've got the language going, and then at some point I've said, I've been talking about all these parts, and there's a process by which I can help you change them and help them heal if you're interested. Most people are. And I'll say a little bit about it, and then I'll say, okay, we can get started, because let's start with that critic, for example. And the way you start is I would have you focus on it, the critical voice or whatever, the impulse, find it in your body, around your body, which sort of shifts people out of their heads into their bodies. So you don't get answers from that thinking part. You get answers right from the part itself. And how do you feel toward this part of you? And answering that, they're telling me how much self is present versus parts that they're blended with. So if they say, I don't like it, I want to get rid of it, I fight with it, whatever like that, that wouldn't be self. It's not one of those C words, fighting or not liking and so on. So I'll say, okay, that makes sense, but let's see if that one would give us a little space for a few minutes to just get curious about this part. Or they say, I'm afraid of it. Okay, could we ask that one to just give us a break, and we'll talk to it later, but right now we just want to open our minds to this part, to this critic. And I do that until, in answering that question, how do you feel toward it, you get some version of, I'm just curious about why it does this to me, but without, an agenda to change it, just purely curious. And now I know I've got at least what we call a critical mass of self to get started. Now, if some of these other parts won't step out, then they become the target part, and for a while, and we find out what they're afraid would happen if they did, and work with them. But let's say they did, they stepped out, and then, okay, ask this critic at that place in your body what it wants you to know about itself, a very non-threatening, open-ended question. And they wait and don't think, just wait and see what comes from that place. Something comes and okay. Uh, and then another kind of magic question is ask it what it's afraid would happen if it wasn't so hard on you, if it didn't do this job all the time. And in answering that question, usually you'll learn about how it's trying to protect. So it'll say, if I didn't do this, you would get out there and you would get hurt. And so I'm trying to keep you down so you don't get hurt. So with that, now we know more of its positive intention. So I'll say to the person, could you extend some appreciation toward it for at least trying to keep you safe, even if it backfires or even if you hate it? When it does it, you let it know you get that it's really trying to keep you safe. And these protectors love being appreciated because they've been hated so much. And uh, and then I would say, ask it if we could heal or change what it's been protecting, so that wasn't such an issue, and it was freed up. What might it like to do instead inside? And you'd be amazed at the answers to that. It's often the opposite of the role it's been in. The critic wants to be your cheerleader, for example. And I'll say, could we get permission? Ask the part if it'll give us permission to go to the one it protects so we can heal it. And that's where the rubber hits the road because there often is a lot of fear of opening that door for good reasons a lot of the time. I mean, for many people, they did open the door and then they were flooded and they couldn't function and all hell broke loose. And so the protectors have sworn they'll never do it again. So you have to become what I call a good hope merchant. You have to sort of sell that there is some purpose to do this. We're not just doing it to rummage around and all that stuff. We're doing it to it'll be, it might be painful for a while, but ultimately we'll be able to heal the part and then they won't have to be so protective. And so a lot of the art of IFS is learning to be a good hope merchant. And we now know what all the common protector fears are and how to address them. And it's also key for you to do it from this place of self so that they trust you more. So uh, so we do that and we don't go without permission. So, and we let the protectors know that they like that. They like being the boss. So, but usually we'll get permission. So then we go to this, the client might see an image of themselves as a child. How do you feel toward that part? And we form a bond, a connection with the little girl or a little boy. And that's great. And I used to think that was enough. But it turns out, again, these parts are frozen in these bad places and they carry these burdens. So we learned that they need to feel witnessed, like you get what happened and how bad it was. Because often we're just trying to minimize what happened or even forget. And we do that until the part says, yeah, now you get it. Now you get what happened and how bad it was. And with that, that's what we call witnessing. Then once the part feels witness, I would say, I want you to go into that scene and be with that little one in the way they need it at the time and tell me when you're there. And we do some stuff back there. And then we bring that one back into the present or into a fantasy place. And once they've been retrieved that way from where they were stuck, now they're ready to unload the feelings and beliefs they got from those times. And so we set that up and ask the part where it carries those beliefs and emotions in its body or on its body and what it might like to unload that to give it up to light, water, fire, wind, earth. We borrow that from shamanism and parts will pick what they want to give it to. We set that up and they let it out of their system and gets transformed. And now the part is feeling much better. Uh, and then we can have qualities come in and fill it up. And then we introduce it now in its healed state to the protector and all the other protectors. And they now are open to taking on new roles where they would never have thought of doing that before. So So that's a very condensed version of the process. And I think with the time we have, a little less than an hour, I think. I better go to the video, which is an example of what I've been talking about. And this is a guy named Eamon who is a leader in the psychedelics world. And lately I've been doing a lot of work with leaders of various kinds to try and help them bring what they're bringing, their social activism, from a place of self rather than from their parts. And so I had done a couple sessions with him before this video, and I think you'll see, because we've done those sessions, he we didn't have to work much with his protectors. He'd already done that, and so we can go right to an exile. So that's what I'm going to show here. Okay, so hopefully you see this.
So it's interesting. I'm watching like my parts kind of come online again. But my ability to work with them is really way, way better. And I've been doing it like when I run, I do a lot of like working with my parts. I run every morning and I like, so like this morning, so briefly, I'm working with a guy who's dating a really famous actress. And I met her for the first time over like a phone call yesterday. And she complimented me and my work. And she was very hurt that I didn't compliment her work, which I was kind of surprised because I was like, I thought you were supposed to like not mention them being celebrities. I thought you were supposed to act like they're not celebrities. But anyway, she was like really hurt about that. And then it like derailed the work that I was doing with the friend. And like, it just turned into like drama out of nowhere. And so this morning when I was running, there was this kind of like voice of like, well, this is their fault, this is her fault and his fault. And it was very like blame and fault. And I was like, okay, so part of me that is blaming and finding fault, can you step aside for a minute so I can kind of like be with the part of me that's hurt? And while just like running. And so I was like, hey, what's going on? And it's like, oh, I'm fucked up again. Like I'm in trouble. People don't like me. And I wanted to share that with you because I feel like that's kind of one of like the core ones for me is like, whether it's around my sexuality or it's around my work or whatever, there's a part of me, and it's kind of the same part that was like the kid at the soccer field is like, I did something wrong and now I'm alone. I'm abandoned because I did something wrong. Now I'm not going to be able to work with this guy because I said the wrong thing to his girlfriend. And there's this like feeling that this part of me has of like, I did bad. I'm wrong. I'm bad. And then some other parts come in to say, no, they're bad. They're bad. They're bad. And those parts are very much like looping thinking. Mm-hmm. And so I want to move them out of the way so that I can be with the little boy who's like, I'm bad. I did wrong. And so I feel like that's like a place that I need to sort of work. So
yeah, but just in general, it's great to hear all this, and I'll explore that toad medicine. Okay, so this is what we're shooting for. That IFS becomes a kind of life practice where you get triggered, you blend with the protector who wants to blame her, and then you realize it and you separate and you look at what it's protecting, which is this little boy who feels kind of bad and worthless, and then you get curious about him, and then you bring him to someone like me, and so you can see that it does become a kind of life practice. And many people can do that much on their own, and then they might need some help to actually heal the exile, which is what we're going to do. So I'm going to move it up a little bit because he and I compare notes on psychedelics for a while. Shoot. Through the IFS lens, because it's a helpful lens.
Yeah, it's been really helpful. And I really like the ability to do the IFS work when I notice one of my parts activated and to be able to go deeper. What I haven't been able to do yet, so I looked around at the video from last week. Mm-hmm. One of the things that's hard for me is like when I watch myself, I find it like super embarrassing. And I don't know if that's a common experience for people, but I feel like I'm like faking it or it's not real. And I know that that's like a part. Yeah. But I kind of feel like I want to like go like to the place. Yeah. I feel like I'm kind of like, there's different parts and I'm working and there's sexuality stuff that's hard and there's this, but I feel like there's like a place that's like right here and I want to like go there. So yeah, maybe we can do that.
We will, but you got to go at the pace your protectors are okay with. So
yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. Okay, so you want to work with this shame you're talking about?
Okay, let's work with shame.
So you ready?
Yeah.
All right, so find that feeling in your body, around your body.
Okay.
Where do you find it?
It's right in the core of my belly, right, like behind my solar plexus.
How do you feel toward it?
I've really worked on loving, so I do feel a lot of love towards it. I think of the sensations I get at that part of my body as a kind of gift. Mm-hmm. I've spent a lot of my time wanting to remove it and make it go away, but now the way I feel towards it is I want to bring love to it and be tender with it and touch it tenderly and just be tender. It's a physical pain that's pretty consistent for me. And it gets really flared up when I feel like I've done something wrong.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's do that. Let's bring some tenderness to it and see what it wants you to know as you do that.
The sense that I got from it this weekend, and I'm kind of getting now, although it's taking me a little while to really connect, is that it's always going to be tender and that having an attitude that I'm going to heal it is actually like my desire to get rid of it. And it doesn't want to be gotten rid of. Mm-hmm. It's like, I feel like it like gives me important messages through the pain that I feel there. Mm-hmm. Like it's trying to help me. Mm-hmm. And that it just like the essence of it is just a pain, like a tender painfulness.
Okay. So let it know we're getting that and we're not going to try and change it at all. We're just trying to get to know it better.
Okay. I feel like it is a version of some of the things we've already talked about. Mm-hmm. Like the little witch girl, like the meatball that was holding, like the fat monster. Well, maybe not the fat monster as much, mm-hmm. but like the witch that's like, that's like part of it. Mm-hmm. I feel like it has a lot of different faces and aspects. It all kind of comes down to the same thing.
Ask it about that. What does it come down to? All that.
It just says that I'm wrong and bad.
Okay. And why does it feel the need to say that?
Because it learned that it needs to not be wrong and bad. So it tries to help me by trying to make sure that I'm not wrong and bad by alerting me to when I'm wrong or bad.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Amen. So let it know. You get it's trying to protect you that way.
It feels like when I talked about the meatball was like a holding. And this is actually deeper than the holding. It's not a holding. It's just this really, really tender place that's like kind of like an alarm. And it's like a wound, and it's not holding. It's not part of me trying to control myself. It's more just like an alarm to let me know if I've done something wrong.
Yeah. Let it know we're getting there.
It likes when I kind of like massage it like this.
Great. And is it wanting you to listen to it more, or what does it need from you?
Oh, that's kind of surprising from what it said earlier, but it says it does want to heal.
I thought so. Okay. So we can do that. So, see if it wants to show you where it got these beliefs about itself in the past. So we're starting the witnessing.
It's my dad poking me.
Uh-huh.
My dad poking me in the chest like that.
Yeah. Oh, literally doing that.
Yeah, literally like poking me in the chest and making scary faces.
Okay. So tell him to really let you get how scary that was and how bad it made him feel. As much as he wants you to feel and see and sense it all.
I can feel him kind of flinching and trying to make himself small so that he doesn't make my dad angry.
Yeah.
And I feel like he's a place in my body that could become a black hole that my whole body could hide in, so it wouldn't be in the way.
Uh-huh.
And it's a scared part, but it's less scared it's not cerebrally scared. It's like flinching scared.
Yeah.
It's like animal scared. And very on edge, very worried.
So just stay with it.
I can feel my heartbeat in it right now. I can feel my heartbeat through this point. And I feel like it's communicating with me less verbally and less narratively and more like somatically, and like it's about sensation and physical, not about ideas. And it's not saying, oh, my daddy didn't like me. But it kind of is saying that, but not with words. It's more like, how do I get away from him? How do I get small so he doesn't notice me?
Yeah. Yes, just stay with it until he feels like you really get how bad all that was for him. So wanting to make sure the witnessing is complete.
I think that he's so conditioned to not want to be in the way that he sort of doesn't want to burden me with his pain and loneliness. But I'm telling him that I want him to share that.
Perfect. That's what I was going to ask, is what do you want to say to him about it? You can see
I tell him that, it's not fair. It wasn't right. Yeah.
You can see his self is starting to take over now and relating to the part in a healing way. And I can kind of drift back.
He's really scared and lonely, and I know all of this, but what's new for me is the flinching, the kind of like reactive, trying to be small, and trying to like pull away and be hidden, and then how that led to being so alone. Like the loneliness of trying to be small, because what he wants is to dance and sing and roughhouse and be rowdy, but he's very afraid to do that. Well, let him know we're going to free him up and get him out of there, but ask him if he does feel like you're getting everything now. He says that what I'm not getting is how heavy the air was even when Dad wasn't there. Okay. And how the whole house was heavy and thick. The air in the house was thick and heavy. Can you get that, Emma? Yeah. I'll let him know you get that piece too, and how oppressive that was. And his mom didn't help him. She just was looking out for herself. She just couldn't. She just didn't know what to do. Yeah. But it's, the whole house is heavy. And it's hard to just grow. Yeah, and there wasn't any relief from it, it sounds like. Yeah, it was always like, even when Dad was gone, there was the fear of him that was always there. That's right. And the fear of him poking or grabbing, or like being scary, like coming in, like with his face, with his hand, or like on the arm, like that. And also just like feeling like he just hated me, like he was just so angry at me, and me especially, like not my brother. And the stuff that bugged him the most was stuff that my body wanted to do. Like my body wanted to dance. My body wanted to jump and sing and yell. And I think that part of the heaviness in the house is not being able to express my body, not being like the energy in my body, not getting to move, or having to hold. Yeah, there's so much, there's like little boy energy, like roughhouse energy, like play energy, that got kind of shouted down and shouted into being quiet. And then just, a exuberant little boy, just always trying to be quiet, always trying to not get in the way, and then not being able to and getting in trouble. Oh yeah, and the feeling of being in trouble. He hates to be in trouble. He just wants to not be in trouble.
That's right.
That's what it is he just, more than anything, he's just trying so hard not to be in trouble. And it's unpredictable too.
Yeah. Yeah, you can never know when you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah. And I just the feeling that like what was natural for him was wrong. Like for Ian, it was natural for him to be quiet. Like he was naturally the way that was good, but my way was bad. To sing and shout and jump, that was bad. So trying to control my body. I can really feel it in this point in my stomach.
It's really great.
Really feel it. And I'm massaging it, lovingly massaging and just saying, your body's good. It's interesting. It doesn't make me want to cry. It doesn't even feel emotional, really. It feels like it's so physical.
And ask if he does feel like you get everything down.
So there's one more thing. His belly hurts all the time.
How to worry?
Well, I had colic when I was really, really little. And I yelled a lot because I was like, I like screamed for the first like 9 months of my life because I had really bad colic. And I think that there's something, part of why stuff goes to the belt, like the belly place is like a place of pain, I feel like. I think it's all just really, the essence of it is just like this really, really deep sense that the core of me is bad.
That's right.
And that the best I could ever do is pretend to be good.
That's right.
And if I can pretend to be good, then I can feel what it's like to be loved. But you can never feel love when you're pretending. That's really when I press in deeply right in the middle. I don't trust myself right there.
Right.
That's in that really deep place. I don't trust myself because I feel like I'm bad.
That's right.
And I feel like a lot of the things that come out in my sexuality and in my life are just like, there's this idea of just badness right in the middle.
That's right.
And then I've got to try to prove that I'm not bad all the time. That's why I do, that I think that's the fuel of all this like personal growth and healing, is just like, I have to change. But the middle part of me always feels, it just feels bad. Not evil. It's not evil. And it's not independent of him, really. It's like, he's the one who decides what's bad and good. And then later, school kids became who decided what's bad and good.
Okay.
And I was bad. And then it's like girls and society but it started with him. He was the one who decided who was bad and good. And he decided that my brother was good and I was bad.
So see if he feels like you get it now.
Do you feel like I get it now? He says that he knows that I understand it, but that he doesn't know how I could possibly feel it.
Does he need you to feel it, or does he just need you to understand
it? He doesn't want either of us to feel it.
Well, there's no need to feel it if he doesn't need that.
Yeah. Well, okay. He says that I do feel it because he feels it and I feel him.
Yeah.
And that I didn't feel him for many years, and that it's really good that I do feel him now.
Yeah. Okay, and so I'd like you to go to him in that time period and be with him in the way he needed somebody, and just tell me when you're in there with him.
I'm with him.
How are you being with him?
I'm cuddling him.
How's he react?
He likes it. And I'm stroking his chest and his belly.
Great.
And I'm telling him that he's good.
Great.
And that he's not doing anything wrong.
Yeah.
And that little boys are supposed to be wild.
That's right. It's really good.
Little boys are supposed to be wild.
Right, exactly. It's beautiful. It's really great. You can tell him that and he can hear you.
Little boys are supposed to be wild. It's not just that you're not bad, you're good. You're supposed to jump and play and yell. That's what you're supposed to do. Everything that you're doing is right and it's good, and you can trust yourself.
Really, really beautiful. Just keep going.
That's what it is, you can trust yourself that what your body does, what it wants, what comes out of it is good. You don't have to hold it and control it.
That's right.
It's okay to be rowdy. It's okay to roughhouse. It's okay to fight. It's okay to hurt yourself. You don't have to be afraid and hold it all.
Can you believe you?
Yeah, that's why I'm crying.
It's great.
I mean, this is really it. This is really, it's not about one thing that happened or one kind of like hurt that was done. Right. It was the constant message that you can't trust yourself, that your body is doing the wrong thing and you have to control yourself and then do something different. That's the wound. It's not even the poking or the yelling or the scary stuff. It's the way that that programmed me to not trust myself. Exactly. That's why I'm so confused about sexuality and about what my body wants.
That's right.
And then I get anxious. And instead, when something happens that's not okay, instead of saying, no, that's not okay, I immediately, without even thinking about it, I go in to holding, and this anxious feeling happens. because what my body wants to do is say, no, that's not okay. I don't allow that.
Right.
But instead, I immediately go like hold and then figure out the right way to say it. So you're nice and not bad.
That's right.
So when Leo's stupid girlfriend got on the phone and was acting all awkward and weird, and then Leo acted like it was my fault, I should have said, no, you're fucking working for me, and your girlfriend shouldn't have gotten on the phone, and what you're doing is wrong, and I don't feel comfortable with this, and I'm not happy.
Yeah, it's all tied together. But are you still back there with him in that time?
Yes.
Right. And see if there's anything he wants you to do for him back there before we take him to a good place.
He doesn't want me to leave. He hates being left alone in his bed.
Mm-hmm.
And he likes it when people sing to him.
It's great. Go ahead and do that if he wants.
There's a song, the nicest that my dad was to me when I was a little boy. This thing that was the nicest thing was when he'd sing to me at night. Like sometimes he would sing Speed Bonnie Boat to me. And it was like, always made me feel special because the words are, it's Speed Bonnie Boat like a boat on the wing over the sea to sky, carry the lad who was born to be king. And it always made me feel like I would be a king. Like I was a prince. So I'm singing and I'm petting his hair.
Nice.
And he's happy.
And you can see if he needs you to do anything with the father or if that's not important at this point.
I don't think it's important.
Okay. Just be sure he says that. Just check with him.
Oh, no, wait. I was wrong. He wants me to tell him he's wrong.
Yeah. So
he wants me to go to dad and say, Eamon isn't wrong. You're wrong. You can't drink anymore and you can't be mean because that's wrong.
Perfect. So
okay, I'm going to.
Yeah.
He wants me to tell both of my parents that I have to let him be and let him be free. And that if I'm too loud, then I'll go outside. Okay, he likes that.
Good. Anything else, or is he ready to leave with you now?
He trusts me.
That's right.
So he's ready to go.
Good. All right, so let's take him anywhere he'd like to go. Could be a fantasy place. It could be you with you in the present, whatever he wants.
He is very clear on wanting to be with me. He wants to be in my heart on a swing.
Perfect. So go ahead and set that up.
Okay. So he's in my heart, but it's also like an adventure place. So he can like run around, climb on trees, and yell a lot and dance and get angry if he wants to. And just like, it's a place where he can do whatever he wants.
Let him know you're going to stay with him and keep him in there, and he never has to go back. and see if with that, if he's ready to unload the feelings and beliefs he got back there.
Had a weird little bit of a protector from up top who just like interfered for a minute. That's a little strange. Shame Wizard just was like, hey, he's not ready to unburden. But that's not him. That's just Shame Wizard.
Tell the Shame Wizard we're going to leave that to him. It's not the Shame Wizard's business.
The Shame Wizard is now ashamed.
Well, he can unburden too. He can throw his shame out.
Yeah, why don't you unburden your shame with it? Okay, now that's good actually. Okay, you can come and we're going to unburden together. You can unburden the shame. You can unburden sexual shame while little Eamon unburdens his feeling that he's wrong.
Perfect.
And it's a fire. It's a campfire.
That's great.
It's like a sing-along campfire. So it's not like a dramatic unburdening. It's like singing and like throwing things in the fire. And actually all my little boy wants all of the parts to come.
Good.
And so all the parts are sitting around the campfire. God, my parts always just want to like sing and dance. That's just what that like. It's always singing and dancing. Yeah, and the little blue guy who never stops dancing, hanging out, and the little girl witch is there, although she's not a witch anymore. And that's my girl self, and my girl self and my boy self are like little best friends.
That's great.
And they're all just letting it go and putting it in the fire and roasting marshmallows. And the big belief is that I'm not good.
That's right.
That's the big belief that needs to go in the fire.
That's right.
Is that I'm not good, because it's not true. I'm really good. I'm a very special, good, loving, kind person. And I don't have to prove it. I just am it.
That's right. Oh, that's true.
Yeah. Oh, he's happy. He's like all cute. Oh, he wants dad and mom to come to the fire now too.
Okay.
He wants grown up dad, because my dad and I are friends now. He wants like my old man dad to come.
Okay, good.
Oh, okay. I'm having a whole moment. So he's got old man dad, which is dad today, who's very sweet. And he's telling him that he forgives him. And he's holding onto his arm.
That's really great.
That's really sweet. And he wants my brothers there. Okay, now he wants everyone in the world there. That's getting a bit crowded. But he wants all the people that he's felt blame towards to be at the fire, so that they can unburden too, and so he can forgive all of them.
Fantastic.
He's really going with all of this. he's really just like, okay, so now he's like trotting around the fire, and like he's like a military commander, and he's like telling people that they can unburden their problems, and he's like it's okay, just unburden your problems, and he's like really taking a big leadership role. Oh, that's so cute. Oh, he is really good. He's like really wants to share. He wants to share with everybody.
It's really neat.
Yeah, that's so sweet. Nice job, little me.
And if he wants to, he can invite qualities into his body, whatever he'd like, and just see what comes in. So I think we have to stop and take questions and reactions, but it goes on another 10 minutes or so, and he brings in new qualities, and we bring in other parts that had been upset with them and check to see how everybody's doing. So I just want to say how grateful I am to Eamon for letting me use this. And I was looking at the chat as we did, and I could see it was very moving for a lot of you. So I'm really happy about that. And I'll let Eamon know how many of you he affected. So, but we have some time for Q&A. So Cindy?
Yes, we do. There's quite a lot of questions in here. Let's see. Let me start with how do you engage a client who is completely disconnected from their body? I have a client who struggles with getting connected to their body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a part. So we would start with that dissociative part and find it. And usually it's out of their body. And then we just get to know it and why it's afraid to let them connect with their body. And it becomes the target part for a while.
Gotcha. Okay, and how would you do something like this with a client who dislikes or struggles with visualization, or someone who doesn't resonate with the idea of personifying parts and resonates more with the concept of aspects of oneself?
I'll use whatever word the client uses. So if they want to do it with aspects, and I'm one of those people who can't visualize. I have what's called aphantasia. So I don't see a thing when I go inside. And at first I thought, how ironic. I'm the one who developed this and I'm the only one who can't do it. But it turns out the 4 or 5% of us that have this can do it. We just do it differently. It's all through sensation and some of the emotion and I can dialogue with my parts. I just don't see anything.
Okay. All right. That's a great. So we don't have to worry whether you can visualize or not. Do new parts develop through treatment, or is simply wrong word, but can't think of another better word, the self?
Well, yeah, parts don't develop. Like I said, you come into the world with them. And there are lots of parts we never run into because they aren't burdened and they're just doing their jobs. But as you do the work, you run into more and more parts. And I'm doing this 40 years and I'm still running into new parts that need attention.
Got it. Okay. What would you recommend a beginner? What book would you recommend for a beginner to learn more about this?
So there are a number of books. The sort of handbook, the manual for therapists is called Internal Family Systems Therapy, second edition. I co-authored. For the public, this book, No Bad Parts, people seem to love, that came out a few years ago that I wrote. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And there, anybody interested in IFS training can go onto the IFS-Institute and learn more about the training there, right?
Yeah, ifs-institute.com
Okay.
is our website.
I think I saw that in the chat somewhere. Okay, I have a client who rejects her body being a part of who she is. She sees it as a separate from her mental self. It has really let her down, physical health ailments, obesity, chronic pain, etc., and believes her body is not representative of who she is. I've struggled with how to work with this.
So again, that's a part. So, and with some people like her, it's good to shift to what we call direct access, where a lot of times that part is so upset with her that getting her to separate, getting it to separate from her and allow her to talk to it takes a long time. So sometimes I'll just say, let me talk to that part directly and I'll have a conversation with it and get to know it and it'll start to trust me. And then I can hand the baton to her to work with it.
Okay. Okay, great. And let's see, how do you handle when your own parts interfere in a relationship with a client during a session?
Great question, because you can only do what I did if you've done a lot of work with parts that might get triggered by various emotions that come up with your client. or might get triggered by the resistance. Or so the ability of the therapist to stay in self leadership is crucial to getting to these places. And to do that, you do have to do a lot of work on yourself, which I have. And but back in the day when I hadn't, and parts would get triggered, uh, I was fortunate that I had a lot of clients would call me out and say, "You're not really here right now, are you?" And I used to pretend and say, "Oh yeah, no, I'm here. What do you mean?" And then I learned that just made him trust me less. So I've learned if a client does call me out to just say, "Let me check," and then I'll say, "Yeah, there was a part that was thinking about lunch or whatever, and I'm really really sorry, and I'm going to work with it so it doesn't keep happening and make a repair like that." So yeah, all this stuff about parts of the therapist and self of the therapist is crucial and is a lot of what our trainings are about, our level ones and level two trainings. Yeah.
Great, great. That was a great question. How about, does a client have to have a certain level of insight and awareness in order to engage in this type of work?
Not at all. I mean, we work with kids down to about age 4 who are amazing at doing this. They do it a bit differently. Uh, we work with DD clients. We work with all kinds of clients, and people can do it. The
Great.
only population I've had some trouble with is people with severe brain damage. I've had pretty good luck with mild brain damage, but not with severe.
Severe. Okay. Okay. And would it be severe brain damage from an injury or birth?
Yeah, from an injury.
Injury
Either one,
or
yeah.
birth too. Can you speak about perpetrator introject?
Yeah. So what's called a perpetrator introject is mistakenly thought of as this nasty thing inside. And what you find, because when I initially wondered if all parts are good, I deliberately consulted to a treatment center for sex offenders and worked with parts that had done horrible things, and they had what you would call perpetrator introjects. And when we went to those and got curious about them, it turned out they were parts, they were protectors. And back in the day when the kid was being abused by his perpetrator, this part said, "Who has power in this room? It's this guy doing this to me. I'm going to take in his energy to protect my person from him." And so now, yes, it does have that perpetrator energy, that burden, but it isn't that. It's a part that's carrying that burden that can unburden just like every other part. So I'm really against the idea that there are these perpetrator interjects, and that's all they are, because they're always just these parts that are desperate to protect and got stuck with this stuff.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense. Let's see. Do we ever externalize parts? For example, a person who has a general distrust for their own goodness and insights, but does trust the wisdom of a higher power as they feel they hear it. Could that be a part?
We do. Uh, Sometimes it's a part, but more often it's what we call a guide, and there are guides that will come, particularly in sort of crucial points in the work, and always are valuable and always have a lot of wisdom to lend. And if you ask if they're parts, they'll say no, and if you ask what they are, they'll kind of hedge. But they seem to be kind of spiritual helpers. So
Oh,
and more and more, when I ran into the phenomena a couple decades ago, it freaked me out. But now we call them in often. Yeah.
great. Thank you. Thank you for that. Couple more questions. We have 3 minutes left. What is a tip for working with a resistant or very resistant or stubborn part, like an anxious part that helped the client to be successful and doesn't want to step aside?
Yeah. So again, if it won't step out, I'll shift to direct access and I'll talk to it directly for a while. And I'll just go over all of its fears, and give it a lot of appreciation for getting the client that far, and ask how tired it is, or how old it thinks the client is, which again is always very young. And just schmoozing that way, often these parts will relax, and they don't usually even know about self. So helping them see there is this other person, they don't have to carry the ball the whole way themselves, really, really helps them.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, one final one. How does neurodivergence impact parts work, if at all?
It does, and I can't tell you in 2 minutes, but there's a woman named Sarah Bergenfeld, who specializes in IFS and neurodivergence and people on the spectrum, and is herself, and is great at describing all of that. And I think she might have videos. Do you know, Amanda? I would just Google Sarah Bergenfeld. She's presented at our conference several times.
I'm going to drop the link to her website in the chat in just a second.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you, Amanda.
Amanda. Well, Dr. Schwartz, we certainly appreciate everything you've done today and all the time. And there's clearly a huge interest in this, and people find it valuable. So we appreciate all of our attendees for coming.